Hello everyone, my name is Jen and welcome to the Book Review. Hey y'all, and welcome to a very exciting video that I have for you today, which is going to be the spiciest books that I've read this year. Now, of course, as we start every video, I have a few qualifications. One, y'all have known that I've brought up multiple times that I'm not so much of a fan anymore of books that are spice just because, that they're there. And I'm not talking about erotic romance because I have some erotic romance on this list, but in erotic romance, it's more important than ever that the story be very interlinked with the intimacy, with the sex that happens in it. In fact, there are some erotic novels that don't have as many sex scenes as some that aren't, because the purpose of an erotic novel is that the emotions and the story are progressed by the sex, whereas another kind of romance novel, you would still have the same, basic story if you removed the sex from it. If you made that story closed door, you still would have enough of the emotional connection and story going to have a romance, right? So this is somewhere in the middle for me because I still wanted to make this video. I've made a video like this that had either best sex scenes or favorite spice or stuff like that. For the past few years. So I wanted to do it again, but with the caveat this time that these are books that are 4 and 5 on my personal spice scale, which I have that listed on a few places, but maybe I'll share it real quick. Maybe I won't. I don't know. But so it's 4 or 5 on my spice scale, but it still has a very powerful and compelling romance, and it wasn't just spice all the way through. So those were kind of my qualifications for making this list. It wasn't going to be just erotic things or just the kinkiest things, but that the sex, while there is a lot of it, it is all extremely compelling and pulled me into the story. So without further ado then, let's go ahead and get into it. And I want to start off with a series. I grabbed 2 of the books from it that I started at the very beginning of this year, and I have been enjoying it throughout the year as more books came out. This is one that I've said multiple times I never expected to read, much less love as much as I do, and much less at this end of the year have one of the books in my top 10, which is amazing. So that's going to be the Legacy of the God series by Rena Kent, which begins with God of Malice, which this one is, I believe this one is Killian and I always forget her name. It is Glendon, this couple. And then the most recent one was Nikolai and Brandon. And this is one that's on my 6-star list. It was so good. So this is one that it's some of the darker romances I read this year. And so there is dubious consent, even some consensual non-consent, even some that almost appears non-consensual until we pull back the layers and get a little deeper into it. And I haven't read as many kind of these almost psychological dark romances in a while because they've just been too heavy for me lately. So I've kind of stepped into a bit more of less in the dubious consent area. I've only read a few this year, but there was just something about the type of characters, their mental state, a little bit psychotic, a little bit, sociopathic, a little bit devious, that just really drew me in and kept me addicted to the series. And guys, the spice, this series has some of everything in it. There are, as I said, aspects of BDSM in here. There's lots of primal play. There is some knife play and blood play at different times too. There are also many trigger warnings for these books, so make sure you check them out. But this is a series that was both dark, spicy, romantic in places, and extremely emotional. And it's a series that is not going to work for everyone, just as, no romance is going to be for everyone. But this series, when I think of what is the spiciest yet still emotional punch, it's going to be the Legacy of the Gods, which this is a 2nd generation series. So people may ask, can you just start with the series? Well, I basically did. I've read a few of the books that are about the parents, but I haven't read all of them. And I didn't have any problems diving right into this. All right, then I have the first of 2 fan fictions that are actually going to be on this list. And this first one is called The Radiant by Fury Shashka. And I don't have a pretty cover for this one. I don't think anyone has done any fan art for this one, but I love this story. And this one was a unique pairing. I've only read a few books with this pairing. This is a Lucius Malfoy and Ginny Weasley pairing. And it actually begins with Ginny being kind of a fuck buddy with Draco. They work together and they've become kind of co-workers with benefits. And then they end up kind of like ending this arrangement. And Ginny has to go back to his house to get some of her books and items that were left at his house, and she runs into Lucius in the library, and things kind of spiral out of control, and they end up having sex there. And for them, it kind of starts with some like hate fucking, and it really starts as, you know, now she kind of has like an enemies with benefits with Lucius, which feels very forbidden. Of course, Lucius is still on the outs of wizarding society. He has a lot to atone for. He has a lot to atone for in the eyes of people. And, you know, the Malfoys are kind of like enemy number 1 to the Weasleys for sure. So Ginny knows that if it were ever to get out that she is sleeping with Lucius, she would be in a lot of trouble. And also, she doesn't know for sure that she even wants there to be more with him. Like, is this just physical? And if it is it really worth like kind of ruining her whole family for some pleasure? But, you know, through the story, we obviously learn that there's a lot more to it, though. I found this one to be very powerful, and I really, really loved seeing the journey that Lucius and Ginny went on to get from this hate fucking in the library to this emotional, deep, lifelong love that they have by the end. And yeah, there's lots of spice in here. There's lots of fun stuff in here. They do, I believe there was a little bit of like switching in here. There's times where like Lucius kind of wants to be like punished for his bad deeds. So there was some, yeah, obviously great sex scenes in here. But I love in a story when it can go from like one night stand type of sex to soulmate by the end. Love that. All right, then we have another series that I discovered this year, but specifically one of the books where I like really loved the sex in it. But we have the Dark Heart series by Jagger Cole. Vicious Hearts was my favorite book in the series. It still is, even though this series is done now. There is 6 books in this series, and there's going to be a spin-off series coming in January. I think the next one is supposed to be coming. But this one is about the head of the Irish family. His name is Killian, and Killian Kildare is a monster wrapped in charm and sophistication. So he sees himself as a psychopath. He sees himself as a serial killer who is contained because he likes to kill. And so he finds ways to do that, being a mafia boss, where, you know, he's not going to get caught by the police doing it. And he does a little bit of like vigilante serial killing, right? You know, like he's not taking out innocents, so we say. He tends to go after people who have gotten away with something, right? But then we have our heroine, Una, who she's actually the daughter of an enemy of the family. And she's been coerced into trying to kill Killian. So she sneaks into a sex club that he frequents. She's wearing a mask. She convinces him, you know, like they have a connection. He takes her into one of the back rooms to fuck her, and she actually stabs him just as he is fucking her. So quite the situation that we begin with. Killian is, of course, absolutely pissed, not only that he got stabbed, but that he let his guard down enough and this woman had tricked him in this. So he tracks her down and discovers who she is and how she's connected to his enemy. And then he makes her a deal that she can't refuse, that she's going to marry him, which will keep her safe from the person who's forcing her to do this, but also, you know, it will make a alliance, because her being the daughter of this enemy, they think by her marrying to him, well, it's not going to get the dad on their side because he's just a villain. It will get the family like on their side because now they've made an alliance. Mafia politics, what can you do? But there is some very hot stuff in here. This one also has primal play in it. It also has some just, I don't even know what to say. There's BDSM involved in this. He likes it really dark and edgy. And Una, she's discovering she likes it that way too. There's no other way to say it. But this whole series has some, you know, I've said this is one of the few times I've read like kind of romantic, and it's not all of it's romantic. Like there's a lot of aggressive, sexy things in here, but a like romance from a male's perspective. I've been wanting to read more MF romance from a man's perspective. And this one I think is very interesting. I really liked reading like a man's perspective on like when a man's having sex, because a lot of times we read a woman, you know, explaining what it's like for a man, or another way around. Like it's not like he always gets the women right. Like the women tend to orgasm extremely easily in his books and very loudly and aggressively. So that might turn some people off. But, you know, female writers write that way too sometimes. Let's be real. They do the same thing. So for me, it was interesting to see how a man was written, even if he didn't do the women perfectly. I also still think he writes some very fierce, strong women. It's more specifically, I'm saying like the sex sometimes gets a little like wild in here. So anyway, highly recommend that series. I wish there was audiobooks for those ones. There's not. I don't think any of Jagger Cole's books have audios, which makes me extremely sad. But those ones read very easily, and I've loved the whole series. All right, then we have one that is actually from my 6-star list as well. And this, of course, is Mink by Sophie Lark. This one is an erotic romance, absolutely. This one is about a sex worker whose name is Blake, and a billionaire named Ramses. And he gets a look at her at a racing event, and he is told that she is an escort and that she has a lot of rules and she only will do certain things and all this stuff, and he's like, I want her. So he goes about trying to get her to agree with a date with him, and she doesn't love how eager he is and how like controlling he's trying to be about getting a date with her, because he does try to manipulate her into it a few times. And though she's fascinated by his brain, she's also very hesitant because she is really attracted to him, and that's not something that's been a danger for her in a really long time. You know, as a sex worker, as a high-end escort, she, you know, knows how she plays the game, and she doesn't let people deviate from it and get in her way. And the way that Ramses just wiggles under her, it's fascinating. And there's some beautiful, beautiful exploration in the sex and when she is willing to be vulnerable, of course, through some BDSM, and specifically through a character that they kind of create together, which is her sexual persona, Mink, which she creates when they try some pet play. Now, if you're someone who's always been like, which is me, I'm like this, I don't love pet play. It's not a place I'm usually comfortable going to, because I've usually read it going like way too far sometimes. But the way that it's really used in this is, you know, as the role play and as literally a suit that she puts on, because there's a skin tight, there's a like see-through cat suit she's able to put on. It's like another form of like BDSM, where, you know, in BDSM can be used for the submissive to give up control and like let themselves be led, let decisions be made for them without any pressure, right? That's something I love about BDSM. Her going into the persona of Mink is like another layer to that, because she lets herself just go with the impulses like a cat would, and like want attention the way a cat would, you know, like batting at things and rubbing up on things. Like, it's so hard to explain, really it is. But I think that this was done so well. I really loved how Sophie got into the mind of that, and they like talk about it together. Like, I really love the breakdown they have after some of their scenes. Like, you don't always see that in romances with BDSM even. Maybe you'll see some aftercare, which this does have wonderful aftercare in it, but you don't always see that like they talk about it and they're like, what was really working for you? And there's some great scenes where they're like, you know, taking a bath together afterwards, where she was like, I really liked when you did this and this. Like, I didn't know I could like that. I liked it. And he was like, yeah, the way you responded to me was wow. Like, I love those cute little moments of it where it's kind of like, you know, they break from their scene characters and they talk about it. This also has a thing that I love. This has Blake gets her period in a very like embarrassing fashion, and Blake makes her feel very, or I mean, Ramses makes her feel very like loved when that happens. And I really liked it. So yeah, I had a lot to say about this one, I guess, but I think part of it is too why I like bring this one up so much, why I love this so much, is that I wasn't such a huge fan of another book that Sophie put out this year, which we don't have to talk about. Like, I just was not a fan of that. And part of the reason why I wasn't a fan of that is because I had read this, which this has sex throughout this book. There is a lot of it. It is an erotic romance, but there is movement and character growth and depth that happens in those scenes. And to me, that was the difference between this being an erotic romance that I really connected with and had me like crying, and a book that I felt was just trying to do new crazy sex things that people hadn't read recently. And I mean, I read a lot of the crazy sex things, so I don't need you to do that. Anyway, this is about my favorite spice, not about weird stuff. So there we go. Okay, then we had Berries and Greed by Lily Mayne. So we have kind of a monster, well, not kind of, we have a monster romance here. There's another book in this series coming soon, and I can't wait to read it. So this was the first MF romance that Lily Mayne had written, and I thought that was so cool because I've read all of her books except for a Halloween-ish one that I was scared of reading. But I've read all of her romance, and all the rest of them have been MM, which I love those. But this one is actually about a woman who is getting out of a cult, and about a monster who is of the being that he is of the creature that this cult would worship. They would worship this being. And he's just kind of like really put off by the fact that there's a whole cult that like worships his species. Like, he's like, this is really crazy. But he's able to use his like perceived power as being like a god to them to help him get this woman like out of this cult. It's not a super aggressive one, but it is like, there's very strict rules within it and everything. And he and her end up becoming roommates, and at first there isn't anything sexual about it. In fact, our heroine actually has, let's see if I can pronounce this, vaginismus, which I believe, again, I'm not the technical term of this, so please don't, but it has something to do with sex can be very painful when you have penetration, as well as it can sometimes like cause like a tensing of the muscles where it would make sex very uncomfortable. Part of it is like mentally, but it is also, you know, it is also a physical representation of that, right? So anyway, I'm not a doctor. I don't know this condition or anything, but so she has had struggles in the past with sexual partners who think that it's all in her head, and that, oh, if you just, you know, let me do this to you enough, it'll like be okay, right? And she doesn't want that. She also has always wanted to be more dominant, and the men that she's had sex with before don't want her to be. So, and our hero, the species that he's from, the men are supposed to be very dominant and in control, and he actually has dreams of being more submissive, and he's never been able to fully do that because no partner has let him be the submissive in the situation, and he's just felt a lot of shame for not being manly enough and being what he's supposed to be. So as these two are roommates together and they finally start sharing who they are with each other, they realize that their kinks align with each other. So they begin a BDSM relationship together where the heroine is the dom. So yes, then we get into a lot of the fun, sexy stuff in this one. There is pegging, there is orgasm denial, there is a like chastity implement, I think, for him. There's also no like penetrative sex for her. There's all other ways that she gets pleasure. And I really thought that was a cool way to come at it, right? Of finding other ways for there to be pleasure for both of them. I really liked that. And not always having to have orgasms reciprocated and it still being fulfilling without that. So yeah, I thought that was handled really well in this one. And I mean, as you can tell, a lot of my favorites, I mean, obviously a lot of ones that are very sexy and erotic are going to have BDSM. So I'm sorry that so many of these do. I apologize. I know not everyone cares for those, but most of the ones that are erotic that I read are BDSM. So sorry about that. All right. And the next one, we have the other fan fiction that I have on this list. And this one is very long. And it isn't a Harry Potter fan fiction. All right, there you go. There you go. This is actually a Jane Austen fanfic. It is a real world AU, which means alternative universe, which I mean, all fan fiction is generally alternative universe because you're changing the story, but it takes place in the present times. And it's called At Last by DC Fitzpatrick. And again, I don't have a cover for this one, I don't think. Maybe I do. I don't remember. I'll have to look. This is a Sense and Sensibility. And it is Colonel Brandon and Marianne Dashwood fanfic. So she is like a young college student in this one. He is a older businessman who, the Eleanor character in this one, so the older sister, she actually works at his company. And so Christopher, he meets Marianne when there is a like company picnic. And so Eleanor brings her mom and her sisters to this, and he meets her, and he's immediately taken with her, but she's only like, I think she's only like 19, 20 years old. She's very young. And, you know, he knows that he would maybe appear like a creepier old man, but he does start, you know, this book, the first good chunk of it, it does very much follow the like outline of their relationship, right? So they first meet, he starts to kind of tentatively flirt with her. There's even family members who are like encouraging her, and she's like, no, he's just old. He's like Eleanor's boss. Like, no. And then her eyes get caught by a young Willoughby, who in this, he's a gym bro, which what a perfect like thing to make Willoughby. He's a gym bro. And she gets caught up with this hot young thing that he is. And then, of course, he will break her heart. And eventually, she ends up with Brandon. So the first good chunk of this book is a very slow burn. It plays through the events, as I said, that you'd see in Sense and Sensibility, with there being some heartbreaks for both of them. And then, once they are together, we get a good chunk of this book. And the fanfic author even says they have a lot of different sexual experiences. So we have role plays. They do a lot of different role plays that are really fun. And it is their life for the next few years together with lots of sexy times. So if you want to read Jane Austen, Colonel Brandon fanfic with lots of fun, sexy escapades, I highly recommend. But it still had that sweetness of their relationship, even when things got very heated and passionate between them later on. They both still maintain this beautiful feeling for each other. So, Sanctuary with Kings by Catherine Moon. Catherine Moon is always putting out pretty spicy books. So you know that this was the wrap up of the, of the original trilogy of her monster. Is it Fighting for Monsters? I can't remember the series name. But anyway, it's a part of this one. These are all reverse harems, which you know I'm not always a reverse harem person. But these, like, Catherine Moon does it very well for me. She very much makes me believe in connection between the other characters. There's always some MM scenes in here, as well as, of course, MMF and MMMMF. And this one has a dragon and a griffin and a... Is there the orc is in this one? Is the orc in this one? It's a minotaur. Maybe he's a minotaur. Minotaur and a werewolf, I think, are the four in this one. So, yeah. And then our heroine is part siren. I'm trying to remember what everybody is. But this is like a paranormal historical romance, is how I would say it. And our heroine is someone who'd been rescued from the villain, right? So there is an overall character arc through this series. So, or overall, like, story arc. So you should start with the Lady of Rooksgrave Manor, because they are pretty connected. But in this one, she is in danger. So she ends up being taken to a castle to be kept in safety. And in this castle, there is a pair of mates who live there. There's a dragon who is still in his hibernation phase. He's getting close to coming out of it, but he's in the hibernation phase. And then there is the griffin, who is his mate, who has just had to wait patiently for his mate to awaken. And they've been together for quite a long time. And once our heroine gets brought here to stay, she starts going to visit the dragon, who can visit her in dreams, and they have some really sexy dreams. There's some sexy things that happen even when he's still kind of sleeping. And then when the werewolf and the minotaur, I'm just going to go with that, end up coming back there, you know, they all end up being together. So I know for some people this is their least favorite. I think it's probably tied with the first one for me. I did really like it, and I liked seeing how deeply connected at least like the three of them were. I understand that like the werewolf and the minotaur, we don't get as much of them as we get with the others, but honestly I was okay with it because I just really loved it. And I also loved how we wrapped up the story arc. We see all of the other characters. There is one scene where there is this huge orgy. There's no sharing between the poly groups, but they basically all have like an orgy in the same like room, which was kind of cool. So yeah, no sharing between like the groups, but it was kind of funny. I enjoyed that. It was hot. So yeah, I love that series. That whole series is really, really erotic and fun, and there's some magic and some danger in those as well for you. All right, then there was a historical called Their Master by S.M. LaViolette. This one is book 5 in the Victorian Decadence series. This one you could read as a standalone. I would say you can. Although Mr. Smith is a character that we see all the way from the beginning of the series, we do. But this is him finally getting his HEA because he's a character we never thought would have one of those, right? And with him, so he is bisexual, he is kinky, he is a sadist in a lot of aspects, and he wants a child. He, you know, I won't go into every detail of his reasoning, but he wants someone that will love him. So you can tell he's maybe had some damage in his life. He wants someone who will love him, and he thinks a child is a good way to get that. Now, to get a child, he doesn't necessarily want to get married or want to have to like fully deal with a woman forever, because he doesn't believe that he can be monogamous. He doesn't have any desire to. He wants a child. And you know, he also doesn't want to like lie to a woman. You know, he doesn't want to go out and find some innocent woman that will feel betrayed when he wants to move on and sleep with other people. He wants someone that he can get pregnant and they can be amicable with each other and then raise a child together. So that's his grand plan. So what does he do? He finds a woman to be his mistress who's at a brothel. And she doesn't have any disease. She's very healthy. She's of childbearing age. And he makes a deal with her to bring her to be his baby mama. What he doesn't know is this woman is actually a plant. She's a plant. She has made herself into his perfect woman so that he would be most likely to choose her as his mistress. He doesn't know, she didn't know when she was trying to snag him that he's looking for a baby mama. But when he says, I want you to be the mother of my child, she's like, oh, well, this will get me into his home. This will get me access to him, you know, at least monthly, because he comes by every, you know, during the week of her most fertile time. So she's like, oh, this will get me in the door, basically, right? Because her family wants revenge against him. But this is actually an MMF, and the second M in our MMF is actually a servant to Mr. Smith, and he has been available to Mr. Smith through the years. He's been his, what's it called? His like manservant for many years, or for maybe not many years, for a good amount of time. And he hasn't always been his like lover though. Mr. Smith has had different lovers through the years, right? Some male, some female. And Mr. Smith wants his, you know, woman taken care of, but also to keep an eye on her, because he knows, he doesn't know what is up with her, but he knows she's not quite as innocent as she tries to appear. Of more than that. So anyway, So it ends up being an MMF between all of them. I won't go into all of it, but of course there's lots of sex in here. There's MM scenes, MF scenes, MMF scenes. There's BDSM. There's shaving in this one. And there is, there's some great stuff in this one. I love this series by SM La Violette, aka Minerva Spencer. It has a lot of like darker erotic themes in the series, and there is some like consensual polyamory happening, but there are still HEAs for each book has HEA. So, all right, just a couple left. Next, we have Soul of a Witch by Harley LaRue. This was the third book in the Souls trilogy by her. And I have loved this series. I was very happy we finally got this third book. And this one is about, I believe this one is Everly. I'm sorry if I'm wrong. I think this is Everly. And then this is a demon who has been waiting for Everly. They are actually fated mates. But now, she is the daughter of kind of the villain of this series. And so when we get into this book, we actually like go back in time a little bit and we see the events that have happened to the other women, the other two women in this trilogy, like from her eyes. And we see the things she was forced to be involved in and the things that she like didn't let herself be involved in. So it's very interesting to see that from her point of view. And then there comes a point where her father wants her to be the next sacrifice, and she is able to escape, and she makes it to her this home that belongs to her mother's side. Her mother is dead, and this home is inhabited by monsters and ghosts and other things, and she needs to learn how to use her powers. Her powers have been suppressed by her father and stepmom, I think, and she needs to learn how to use them so she can defeat her father. So there we go. That was a lot of explanation. But basically, once she meets her mate who's there, who's been waiting for her, he's this feral, like, demon man who's been waiting all this time for her, and he's so happy to have her, and there are lots of sexy escapades they get up to. He also likes to be dominated sometimes, so they switch that up in this one, and yeah, and they're also going to work on defeating her parents. So lots of sexy times in this one, but I loved this series so much, so highly recommend. And then the last one I wanted to share, because the year would not be complete without a novel from this wonderful author. So we have Salt Kiss by Sierra Simone. This is the first book in the Lioness trilogy, although you should read the prequel, The Point 5, which is Salt in the Wound. And this one is about Tristan Thomas, who is a bodyguard to Mark Trevenna. Now in Salt in the Wound, Mark and Tristan, they have a fling with each other while he's his bodyguard. Now, Mark is supposed to marry Isolde. They have been engaged for 4 years while she went to school. And now it's time for him to go get her. And he ends up being sick or something, and he can't go pick Isolde up. So Tristan goes, there's a yacht trip that he's going to take to bring her back. And they end up falling for each other on this trip. Now, Isolde and Mark, they don't ever expect to love each other. So, and she's allowed to do whatever she wants before she's with him. Like during their engagement, they don't need to like be faithful. They don't need to even pretend to do that. I mean, Mark certainly wasn't. Mark owns a sex club, so, you know, he wasn't keeping pure by any means. And Tristan, he is feeling very like bitter because Mark didn't tell him that he was engaged, basically until he like sends him to go bring her to him, I believe. I can't remember, it's been a while. So he starts to fall for her, and they start to get a little spicy between them for sure. So yeah, this one, I mean, Sierra Simone, in my opinion, is like the goddess of erotic romance. She's able to make it spiritual in a certain way. Like there are a lot of spiritual imagery in her books, even the ones that aren't part of like the priest books, you know, there's still a lot of like religious imagery and things like that. Isolde had actually wanted to be a nun before she was forced into this arranged situation with Mark, so there's that as well. But yeah, I really loved this. The next book, we finally just got the cover for book 2, which will be coming this next year. Very excited about that. What's the next one supposed to be called? Let's see. Did she list it here? It already had a name. Oh, it's not listed here. I know what it's called, but I can't remember. But anyway, so there we go. That's another of the spiciest books I read this year. So there you go. Those are the 10 books that I think were the spiciest, but also still had good plot and good heart in them. So please check them out. I will have links to all of them down below if you want to purchase them from Amazon. It does help out the channel a little bit. So thank you so much for watching, my friends. We'll see you in the next one. Bye.